Well, joining me now to discuss this is TalkTV contributor and lawyer Paula Rhone-Adrien, the author and journalist Paul Mason, and TalkTV international editor Isabel Oakeshott. OK, right, well, I've got Paul and Paula, and I know where you're both going to come at me from. Paul, look, I was surprised it blew up this big, if I'm honest with you, because really the point I was making was it's for charity, this bet, but are you going to put your money where your mouth is? And I can see the way it's played out, obviously, very differently to how it felt in the room at the time. What was your view of this?
Well, like you, I'm against the Rwanda plan. I don't think it'll work. I think it's unfair. I think it's probably illegal in international law, and it costs a lot of money. But if I was in favour of it, I would try and present it to the public in a little bit more sober way. I thought it trivialised it, because it may be that Rishi Sunak doesn't know this, but there were some migrants put on a plane in June 2022, refugees, to go to Rwanda, stopped by the courts. They were dragged onto that plane and chained to the floor. And I accept that deportations have to happen. In a fair migration system, some people have to be deported. But when we do that on all our behalves, we've got to maintain the idea to the rest of the world that we're humane and we care about those people, even if they fail to...
Well, you said you found it morally...
I did.
Rebels or whatever you said.
I said it was morally vacuous.
Right, and a lot of people said similar sentiments. I think there's a YouGov poll says 72% of Britain think it was unacceptable for Sunak to accept my bet. But I haven't seen much reference to the fact the proceeds are going to a refugee charity.
People may have missed that. It was a newsmaking interview. Let's accept that. The point is, first, it's a grand. You know, I was in my local Tesco just now and watching, young mums looking at whether or not they can afford what's on the shelves. A grand to such people sounds like a lot, even in Northallerton and Richmond. I'm not sure how many Rishi's constituents would have found that very tasteful. But then... they
all know he's stinking rich. I called him stinking rich last time I interviewed him.
But the issue then is, let's not trivialise the fate of a lot of people. A lot of Tory MPs, not just Mr Sunak, often say, we can't wait to see the planes take off. When I hear them say that, I think, what about the people in the planes? They've got, as a journalist, I've been to Morocco, interviewed people on wastelands, people from Niger, and said to them, look, when you get here, you're going to risk dying to get here. There'll be a lot of racism when you get here, and you'll be poor. Why are you doing it? And they say, come to Niger. And you'll find out. I.e., the idea that the deterrent effect is going to stop them coming.
Well, I don't think it'll be a deterrent effect. I mean, Paul, I'll bring you in here. I just don't think it is. I don't think it works on any level. They've already admitted, the government, pretty much, that even if they do get it through Parliament and get these people onto planes, we're only talking about a couple of hundred people at vast expense, maybe £300-400 million to the British taxpayer. It makes no commercial, economic sense whatsoever. But my biggest problem with it is I think we should be a country which can deal with illegal immigration properly, with a proper policy, and the far bigger problem at the moment of a soaring legal immigration issue, which is exploding our entire population. But also we should be a country which can take asylum seekers who warrant coming in as asylum seekers. And if we send people to Rwanda, and even if they fulfil the criteria for entry as asylum seeker, we don't let them come back, what have we become as a country?
Absolutely. And I think I just want to be able to answer your question in terms of you being surprised at the reaction to this bet. I'm disappointed that you're surprised. I'm not surprised. It was crass, it was crude. You were playing with people's lives.
No, I wasn't. That's ridiculous. That's a ridiculous thing to say.
People have died.
I wasn't playing.
In an attempt to come to this
I'm actually
country.
Trying to stop those people's lives being played with.
But you played.
No,
no.
What I was doing,
a crude
what I was doing, Paula.
It was two wealthy men.
What's the wealth got to do with it?
Suggested that let's just put our hands in our back pockets and pull out £1,000
to a refugee charity. Finish the sentence.
But we lost the refugee charity.
Well, you shouldn't use it.
Let me explain why we lost the refugee charity.
It seems to me your solution is the refugee charity shouldn't get £1,000.
No, because Rishi has already spent £240 million of the British taxpayers' money on this failed event. Well, he didn't say, to be fair, in the interview where the £1,000 was coming from.
It seemed to me, did you watch the interview? Did you see the whole debate about Rwanda?
I didn't.
So the idea that I'm playing with people's lives when I was actively trying to stop the British Prime Minister from going through with a policy which I think is playing with people's lives, I find that offensive.
Well,
I can tell you.
What's happened is, Piers, is that you're a slick interrogator. And what you
No, I'm a journalist.
And what you did was you led
used
Rishi
a tactic.
down.
I used a tactic.
Led Rishi onto that
I
ice
asked
rink,
him a question.
and he was like, it was reminiscent of Bambi on ice skates, wasn't it? It was just a car crash.
Right.
And how he can really contain himself today is
by the
beyond
way,
me. He must be cringing.
I did.
So yes, it was a joke. Maybe not to you, but clearly to Rishi.
Let me get a word in. I did what people do, including many of his constituents, up and down the country all the time, right? They have an argument, they reach a place where they're not agreeing, and they go, I'll bet you can't get this to work, right? I didn't mean it as any insult to people. I was trying to stop people being, in my view, mistreated by this country, right? Now, the surprise to me was only that the Prime Minister accepted the bet. Now, that may have been a misjudgment on his part. He was probably calculating in the moment, you know what, if I don't, it looks like I don't believe in my policy. Damned if I do, damned if I don't. And maybe that was a sharp moment by me to flush that out, that hesitation by him. But I do think, Paul, I do think some of the reaction has been ridiculous.
Well, I haven't seen all the reaction, but what I would say is I don't share your criticism of you, Piers. You know, as a journalist, when one makes a news-making interview, you want to make the headlines.
Yeah.
You spent a long time with him. I watched the whole interview. It was a long time. And what was clear to me was that the Prime Minister was in many ways accepting your premises at every point in the argument. And that as a human being, let alone journalist, when you find someone doing that, you do start to wonder, should this guy be running the country? And let's see how far he'll go. I've done that in interviews with people where I felt that really they're out of their depth. Now, I don't want to be unfair to the Prime Minister because any live interview with a senior journalist is a tough thing. But in the end, I just think he's out of touch. And the out of touch, I have no problem with you offering him to bet £1,000 for a refugee charity. But what I do have is the idea that he found that sort of funny enough to sort of think, I can do this.
Well, I think you flummoxed him, actually. Let's be fair, I think you flummoxed him in the moment. He didn't really know what to do. And people criticised and say what he should do. He's only been Prime Minister a year.
He should have exerted his authority.
Of course, because every Prime Minister will tell you, and I'm sure you've had conversations with them, that they are at their best the day after they lose their jobs, right? They get fully trained, properly experienced, and then they get fired. Let me bring in Isabel Oakeshott, who's been listening patiently to this. Isabel, a lot of hysteria about what I thought was a fairly sharp piece of journalistic stuntery to elicit a genuinely fascinating response, which it did.
Well, what a load of sanctimonious twaddle from both Paul and Paula. Paula hasn't even watched the whole interview, so it's rather difficult to imagine how she can possibly be pronouncing on it. Paula said she was disappointed, and I too am disappointed, Piers, because I think you could have bet a whole lot more on that policy not working. Have you fallen on hard times or something?
Honestly, I just came up with a figure in the moment. I had no idea what I was really going to come up with. I just thought it'd be interesting to test his resolve. Interesting to see what he... I just thought it'd be interesting to see how he responded.
Both of you could afford a lot more.
Well, probably. Look, I don't think it's...
both of you could have afforded a lot more. And at the end of the day, whatever the outcome of the bet, whether you're right and the policy doesn't work, which I happen to completely agree with you, I think it's a very safe bet, or he's right and he manages to get this policy off the ground, refugee charity is £1,000 better off. So I'm really struggling to see how anyone can genuinely criticise that. It's the first time I've ever heard either a successful TV presenter or a Prime Minister being criticised for being too generous in donating money to charity.
Well, I said exactly what I thought. I thought, honestly, and they all deliberately left that bit out of it. So they're all ranting away about rich people spending all this. Nobody mentioned in their critiques that this was actually a bet for charity. That's how I prefaced the whole thing. What was interesting, I think, about the interview, Isabel, I know you've seen it all now, was there were other things in that interview that I felt were much more newsworthy. One was where he basically called Keir Starmer a terror sympathiser over this banned group. We had that NHS doctor on the show who leads the UK arm of that now prescribed terror group in this country. And he basically called Starmer a terror sympathiser for trying to stop them becoming a prescribed group by acting for them. And the other thing I thought was really newsworthy was the confirmation by the Prime Minister that one of his key 5 pledges to get NHS waiting lists down, which he actually coupled with sorting out the crisis in the A&E, he failed on. Let's take a look. NHS waiting lists.
We have not made enough progress.
You failed on that pledge.
Yes.
Because you said NHS waiting lists will fall. But the waiting list is still nearly 500,000 more than it was at the start of last year.
Yeah.
So my mother is 79 and she had a heart attack 3 months ago. And she was taken to a local hospital and she was seen when she got there, and then she was put on a trolley in A&E, in a corridor, for nearly 7 hours. The heart monitor battery ran out. Nobody fixed it. At one stage, no nurse came for 3 or 4 hours. And she was also terrified, of course, having been told you've had a heart attack, that no one was putting her into the unit and actually trying to fix her. Now, once she got up there, the treatment she got was world class. But I brought this one picture to show you. That's my mum. And when she really needed the NHS, eventually the NHS came through. But she could have died on that trolley. And I think that's shocking.
Yeah, that is a shocking story. And I'm really glad that she's feeling better now, and send her my best. And I'm glad she got the treatment that she needed.
This was a Monday night, Prime Minister. This wasn't even a weekend.
Yeah.
And it's not even a major city. This is Brighton. Yeah. And there were 40-odd people on trolleys in a corridor. Well, I got an email today, which we're trying to corroborate, Isabel, but it was from somebody else at exactly the same hospital whose mother died on a trolley in that A&E and was there for 24 hours.
Well,
and I think this is going on up and down the country.
I really want to pick up on that. Yeah, I really want to pick up on that, because if I were the Labour Party or any opposition party, I would play that particular clip of your interview on a loop and look at the Prime Minister's reaction. Yeah. To me, this is the most insightful bit of the interview. There is something very, very wrong about the Prime Minister's reaction to your story. He shows no empathy. There is no form of shock in his reaction to your story. He's robotic about it. And that really, really jarred with me. And, I am so glad to hear that when your mum was finally taken up onto the ward, that she got the treatment that you described. You said it was world class. But you, in a sense, you were lucky. Look, my mother recently died in an NHS hospital. I am sorry to say that she died in front of a lot of people, that none of us had any privacy. And in the seconds after she died, my sisters and I were taken into a store cupboard because there was nowhere private for us to go. So I wasn't planning on sharing that story, but the Prime Minister's reaction to your story has, if you like, triggered me to do that, because it was so lacking in any real empathy for the many, many thousands of people tonight who are on hospital trolleys and are not getting the treatment that they deserve. The NHS is failing, and he's admitted it, and it's failed on his watch.
Yeah, well, I'm very sorry about your mum. You and I have talked about that before, and it's incredibly sad for you. And I feel very fortunate that my mother was able to come through it. To have a heart attack in your late 70s and then spend 7 hours on a trolley thinking, what is happening to me, with the heart monitor regularly running out of batteries and no one seemed to notice him, was scary.
Awful.
Paul, what did you make of that part of the interview?
Again, I was looking at his face and thinking, look, Prime Minister doesn't get to meet a lot of ordinary people. And when he does, you were very measured with him. But imagine, we can all imagine a voter saying the same story.
Right.
What would happen in general is that the people behind him would just gently edge him away. Yes. And I think that if he can learn anything, it is listen to these ordinary stories. I bet every single one of us, including all your studio staff, could tell us the same story. I've got stories of 48 hours in A&E.
I've had so many in the last 2 days.
So the NHS is failing. It so happens that we've had one party in government for 14 years, but I'd say, there is a long-term problem with the NHS. I actually think, my hunch, I don't know about you and Isabel, my hunch is that people care a lot more about these stories of everyday hardship than they do about whether the Rwanda scheme deports 200...
And they actually care, Paula, more about the reality of human stories than they do about the over-top-line statistics. You can hear 7.6 million people on a waiting list. Yes. You can hear A&E's out of control. When you actually have a loved one trapped in that nightmare of waiting for an op to save their life or waiting to get put through A&E, it is terrifying.
Absolutely, and I think there's two things here. The first is that you're right. When he's approached by a member of the public, we saw it just a couple of weeks ago. He laughed in response to
Well,
that
I
member
think,
of the
look, to be
public.
fair-
He was caught off guard. He didn't know what to do. But the
that
second,
clip was cut unfairly, actually.
Yeah,
They
it
then
was,
showed the
Well,
longer
the
clip. And that
second
also
point-
happens now.
The second point I wanted to make, though, was about the disconnect. It's the disconnect that we recognise in this story about your mother, and it's the same disconnect that we recognise in terms of the bet. We're talking about our Prime Minister, who doesn't have the capacity to be sensitive enough to understand that when he's asked about making a bet on what is something that for many is a life or death situation, be it about the NHS, be it about Rwanda, that he can just limply shake your hand on a policy that we know, or we are being told, aren't we, that he doesn't even agree with, but he's having to push through.
Look,
it's empty,
I
Piers.
like Isabel. I wasn't going to say this, but I think I will, just to be balanced about it, because the idea that he doesn't care, for example, about my mother and what happened to her and whatever facial reaction he showed at the time, I can tell you he sent her a big bunch of flowers yesterday, and then he followed up and called her without any recourse to me whatsoever. Called her for 10 minutes and had a really lovely chat with her.
The problem is there. You're you. You're
Yeah, of course,
high profile.
of course.
Not sure that helps.
But it was still a nice thing to do.
You know, if only he'd sent my mum a bunch
Of course, but
flowers.
he can't sell every.
No,
he can't
no,
do it to
exactly.
everybody. But my point being that I don't think he's
Or
a
paid the
heartless man.
nurses
right?
and the
I don't think
doctors
he
what they
didn't
were.
care. I don't think he's heartless. I think he does care. But I think that I give them a little bit of slack, politicians, for facial expressions when they're being jumped with stuff which they're not really sure what it's all about. And I can just say that my mother was very touched by both the flowers and the phone call, and greatly appreciated what he said to her. And she certainly came away thinking this guy does care. Now, I completely accept I'm a television presenter and it was a big interview, everyone's talking about it, and not everyone gets that prime ministerial treatment. But he did do that. And I've not had a prime minister do that to any of my family before.
We're not voting for the Conservative Party on the basis of whether Rishi has sent your mum flowers.
Of course, I'm not expecting you to.
That's not what the voters...
Look, listen, we've run out of time.
wanted.
I'm simply trying to balance up the he doesn't care narrative, which I don't think is fair. He does care. I saw it. I spoke to him afterwards for quite a while, actually, after the interview. He definitely cares, right? But we'll have to see whether...
What's he doing about it?
The question is,
What is he doing about
can any leader right now fix the NHS is a much bigger question. I'm not sure...
Keir Starmer.
Well, maybe, and he may get a chance before the end of the year to prove it.
To answer his
We've got to leave it there, guys. I'm sorry, we've run out of time. Thank you. Paula, Paul and Isabel, thank you all very much indeed. I appreciate it.